Very
Your treasurer.
I passed.
Stan tonight. Stan, unfortunately, Stan and Mary are both under the weather tonight. Right. And so from what I understand, Stan and Mary went on a trip and they caught some kind of bug on the way back, so they're a little ill. Of course, I talked to them and it seems like it's nothing major. They're recovering quite fine, so that's great. We wish them well and we'll see them next month. I unfortunately have some other sad news, which I'm afraid to tell you, which probably most of you already know. Longtime member of the society, Jim Boyce, passed away last month. I think it was a couple weeks ago. He had been ill for a short while, and it sounded like he was recovering, but he unfortunately passed on. If you remember Jim, he presented he's done several presentations for us, actually. He presented recently the history of the automobile industry in Millbrook during World War II. He also presented last year one of our presentations on antique farm machinery. And I'm not sure, I think he also helped, or he presented with the Washington Hollow Cemetery presentation a couple of years ago. So, yeah, it's very sad. We're going to miss Jim. He's helped us out a lot. Anyway, well, enough for the sad news. Tonight we have Jack Dean. He is from the Dean Brothers Heritage. The Dean Brothers owned Morona's before Johnny Morona owned it, and we're going to hear all about that. If you've got your flyer, the picture in that is Morona's about at the time of the sale from Dean Brothers to Johnny Morona. So we'll hear all about that. Jack, come on up.
Thank you.
Yeah. Jack Dean.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Jack Dean, and I've been coming here to Millbrook since I guess I was 6 months old. My father was born down on Front Street, and my grandfather was born in Unionville. And then their parents, so this would be the family I'm related to right here. John Dean, and he married Ellen Whalen, and his parents were immigrants, okay? So we were a poor immigrant family, basically. My ancestors are Mary Brennan and John Dean, and they're both immigrants who came from Ireland. They were illiterate, they were poor, they were hungry, they were looking for jobs, they were looking for a way to make their lives better. So we were the typical immigration story. And I had never thought I'd ever do a genealogy project, not at all. Nothing in my imagination, but when my father died in 1980, in his files, I found this file, and it had pictures in it, memorial cards, articles from Louise Tompkins about our family, all sorts of things. So I said, I better keep this. So I put it in my files. And then maybe 10, 11 years ago, I'm a teacher. The director of curriculum said, would you create an immigration unit for us and pilot it and then teach it to the other teachers? We need an immigration unit for, elementary, middle, and high school, and make it interactive so that we can work on this unit. So I worked all summer on this unit, and I was always bored in school when I was a kid. And I hated reading books and memorizing dates and, read a chapter and we'll discuss it in class. So I wanted to make it something that was, the kids had to get involved in it. So I created this unit where it was, they had to write to their grandparents or email their grandparents. They had to go through their family history. They had to ask their parents for, where do we come from? What was it? What was our life like? And then they had to go on the computer. And I asked the district if they would get Ancestry.com. And then we worked with going on and looking for primary documents. And that's very important today when you're teaching to get primary documents, because in history today you don't memorize dates. You don't teach kids, lecture kids. You say, let's get involved in this. Let's look at pictures. Let's look at what people are saying. Let's get diaries. Let's get all these good documents that went on during history. So I had them involved in that. We had a very interactive class. We got to the point where every child, they got very excited. The parents were very excited, and the grandparents were even more excited because they had a communication with their grandchildren. So it got to the point where every child created a book, a family book, their dad's side, their mom's side, where did they come from, doing a family tree, writing a story, trying to get a primary document, and looking for all kinds of things that verified the family. So here we have things from Ancestry.com, all kinds of primary documents. And that's what got started. That's how we got started. Then I brought a writing component into it, and the kids had to make up a fiction, non-fiction story about their family. So we were writing a short story about their family. So those two things, this was the history part, this was the writing part. Then we had a math part to it, and an art project part of it. We did maps. Kids do not know geography today in school. So what we did is we created a map of their journey, and we had these big whiteboards where we created maps so they knew what country their parent came from, where, what year, the whole thing. So I created this unit, and I taught it to elementary school, I taught it to middle school, I taught it to teachers, and I've done some other work with adults with it. So I never thought I would do this, but I ended up making 2 trips to Ireland to do research, and it really became a, something in my life that I was doing, all from this file my father gave me and from teaching school. And I had a great time doing it. It's almost like solving a mystery. And it was really, really fun to do this. Lori Duncan, I don't know how many remember Lori, but I would go over into the library and I'd be researching over there, and I met Lori, and she said, we have back copies of the Millbrook Roundtable. So she had me find all the films there and the things, and we put them on, and she was wonderful helping me. Also, Ginny let me come into the archives whenever I wanted to, and she was showing me all kinds of things and sending them to me. So those 2 people were very wonderful. And Ginny and I were looking at a picture one day, and I said, "That's my father." And she said, "That's my mother." And then we were in the same graduation class. So Ginny and I have a wonderful connection, with that. And we became great friends because of that. And I also have 2 other wonderful friends that I work with on Monday since I retired last year, Bernadette and Kathy, and they've also been very helpful, and I thank them very much for all they do. So between all these people, they helped me tremendously. Well, my family is not that, they didn't do any great things, believe me. As I said, they were poor immigrants. In Mary Brennan married John Dean. They, and I read their obituaries in the paper, in the Millbrook paper. And John, I've seen their stone down in St. Joseph's Cemetery. They said he was born in 1822, and she was born in 1838. Well, those dates are really not right. They're on the cemetery stone, but there wasn't 16 years between them. They were closer in age. And I tried to find where they came from. And it was kind of interesting when I was looking for where they came from. I knew all about their children, okay? Knew all about their children, but I didn't know much about them. I don't even have a picture of them. But I knew they both came to this country. He came supposedly in 1851. She came in 1856, and they were married in 1857. And so I got that, and their oldest daughter, Margaret Dean, wrote their obituaries, and she was very language-based, She wrote these beautiful obituaries for all of her relatives, and they were in the Millbrook paper. So when this lady died in 1907, my great-grandmother, it said she was married 50 years ago in Jersey City. So I said 50 years ago. around 1857. So one summer when I wasn't busy, I wrote to every Catholic church, because we're Catholic, I went to every Catholic church in Jersey City that existed at that time. And I got no replies whatsoever. And then in October, I got this phone call from this woman from the Diocese of Newark. And she said, "Are you John Dean?" I said, "Yes." She said, "I got about 10 letters here. They've all been shipped to me from these churches." She said, "I don't know what to do with them." But she said, when your great-grandparents were married, they never registered. No one registered in the state of New Jersey. What they did is, they just went to the church, the Catholic church, the Protestant church, the temple. They said to the minister, "We want to get married," and they filled out the form. So I said, "Well, where could I find anything about them?" So she said, "Go out to Seton Hall University." So, out to Seton Hall University, they have a lot of archives out there. So, I went out to Seton Hall University. I called them first, because you had to make an appointment. I called them out at Seton Hall, and this woman, her name was Kathleen Dowd. Kathleen Dodds. And she said, "Come on out, I'll help you search for something." So I go out there. She said, "I do have, it's very sketchy. What I have in these churches are very sketchy." But she said, "I have St. Joseph's Church. I have 3 years there. I have 4 years in another church. I have 5 years there. I have bits and pieces." So I go on the microfilm machine and I start looking. And St. Joseph's had 3 years of data. And my grandparents were married there. And they were married, it's very interesting. I thought I had very good luck. They were married on July 11th, 1857, so I was right with the obituary. And they told me the parents' name, and they were married by a Sicilian priest from Sicily, Aloysius Venuti, and it showed me who their witnesses were. So that was really a good find for me. That was being a good detective. So then I said, okay, now I have to find some more things. So I went on the census for Millbrook in 1900 because I knew they were alive in 1900. He died in 1906 and she died in 1907. I go on the 1900 census and they said they don't exist there. There was no one by the John Dean or Mary Dean. So I was researching all these censuses and they said, you know, when people in the small towns took a census, they would go around and it was a social thing. And they would, you know, have a cup of sherry, they would have something to eat and all. It got very social. So I go and I look. So I said, I'll just go through the whole village. It can't be that big. So I went down to the National Archives, which is a great place to go to, down in the Customs House. I went through every single person. And they, instead of putting his last name first, they put his first name. So it was John, Dean, and then Mary underneath, and that's why I couldn't find them. So that was the second thing I found that year. This Kathleen Dodds, who helped me at Seton Hall, said, "Where are you from?" And I said, "Well, I live in the city, but I'm originally from a place called Millbrook, New York." And she said, "Oh, I'm from Red Hook." So I knew right away I was having good luck. So those two things really helped me a great deal. Now, after that, I was trying to go back. I found her parents, and I found his parents' name. I can't find out where he's from. I found out there's a site that you can research things for free called FamilySearch.org. It's organized by the Mormon Church. And they send out their young people and they go to all these churches and they copy records and they send a copy back to Utah because that's part of their religion. They are trying to be with all their ancestors eventually, so they baptize everybody. But they also provide a service for a lot of us. So I went to them and I researched with their FamilySearch.org and I found out they were from Boyle in County Roscommon in Ireland. So that was a good thing to find out. So I found out like 3 things right away that one year. So I went over there, and I went to the National Library on Kildare Street in Dublin, and I found exactly what I wanted to find. I verified that this was true. Then I went up to the town of Boyle, and there's a sacristan in the church, and he took out the records. He had them all in a safe, and I got copies of the records. So I found out my great-grandmother's family. I can't find out these. Now, these people were illiterate. They were farmers. So when they lived out on the farm, they worked the farm, there was really no need for them to learn to read or write. And we're going back to, this couple were married in 1825. She died in 1845. He took his 2 daughters and moved to England for his sister to help raise them. So they left Ireland at an early age, and she had 2 brothers still in Ireland. So again, it's a very typical Irish family. They were poor, and they wanted to get out to get a better life. That's basically what happened there. So there were a lot of trouble with immigrants down in Jersey City. So these 2 people did not stay there. And the first time I found them on a census for a primary document was 1860. And they were in Pleasant Valley, and they had the husband and wife and the first daughter. And in those days, it was very common to have roomers come in, or boarders, and there were a couple boarders living in the house also. He worked at one time at Thorndale. He was a laborer at Thorndale. And then eventually, he got a job on the railroad. And that was a real wonderful thing for him. I mean, to come from Ireland, to be illiterate, to bring your family, to get married over here, to have children, to start a life. If he stayed in Ireland, he never would have had that, So again, it was a typical immigrant story. They had quite a few children, okay? So this is the generation of my grandfather. And John Dean and his brother Jim Dean, John Dean worked on a railroad in Highland. Jim Dean had a Borden's milk route, and it came out to Millbrook. And so Jim Dean said to his brother, how about we start a general store? So they started this general store, and it was in the old bank building. They rented the old bank building, and I think it was started around 1880, the bank building, the story. Okay, around 1880 that was started. It's kind of interesting. Peter Dean, he went out to Idaho, and he became a potato farmer, and he married a woman out there, and he had 2 sons. And a senator from Idaho said one year, we don't have anybody to go to West Point. Would one of your sons be interested in going? He said, sure. So his son, Clarence, came to West Point, and he had a wonderful time because he had all family in New York, so they were always visiting West Point. Tom Dean owned a men's store in Millbrook. It burnt down in 1916, and then he started an insurance business, and life insurance, car insurance, house insurance, and then he sold it to George Whalen, who was a cousin of my grandmother. Marion Dean got married to John Simmons. 2 brothers married 2 sisters here. Margaret Dean married Jim Simmons, and Marion Dean married John Simmons. And then one daughter died, and then there was a priest, okay, a young guy. There was a priest here that said, your son has a vocation, you should pursue that. So he became a priest. Now, there were 23 grandchildren out of this group here. It was a good, productive Irish family. 23 grandchildren. 20 of them went to college, okay? And that's because of this man here. He told his brothers and sisters, you gotta send your kids to college. And so they ended up all going to college. I don't know if you knew my cousin Gert Simmons, she taught school here. But, she went to New Paltz, she went to normal school, and she went to New Paltz. Her sister Margaret did also. So Margaret Simmons went to college. Gert Simmons did. Father John went to Holy Cross. George Simmons was the assistant postmaster in town. I don't know if you remember him, but he worked with Dick Stanton. Dick Stanton was the postmaster. Pete Dean's sons, one went to West Point and one went to University of Iowa. Three of the Marion's children went to college. My father's family, Francis ran the store, so he didn't. Helen, Charlie was the dentist in town. Did anybody know my Uncle Charlie? He was a dentist. My father was an engineer. Stans was a lawyer. So they all, I mean, it was, by the third generation, things were successful. And when you think these people were illiterate, these two generations that I researched, really upsetting to me when I found out they came here and they couldn't read or write. And he didn't, I don't think he really read or write when he died. I really don't think so. That really was a shocker to me. So they were successful on their way, okay? We had three priests in the story. I'm going to tell you a funny story. I have a cousin, Joan, who lives in Florida. She's a friend of Ginny's. And I said, Joan, you lived in Millbrook so long. Where did they come from in Ireland? She said, Jack, I don't know. But she said, the three priests, this guy died in 1919. He died in 35, and he lived for a long, long time. This was Gert Simmons' brother. They went to Ireland together to look at the family roots. And when they came back, so they said, what did you find? Oh, we're not going to tell you. We're not going to tell you. So we never heard what happened. We really never heard what happened. This is a great picture of the five brothers. These people must have really been into taking photographs, you know, because they had good pictures. Here's a picture of my father on the front of the family store. There's a photo here of the Dean family in 1917. They were huge, absolutely a huge family. And they're great for photographs. I have a cousin, Mary. She lives in Newburgh, and she gave me a great number of photographs. And I have another cousin, Tom Dean, who just died about a year ago, and he gave me a whole group of his grandfather. So we have great pictures. My Uncle Francis, Joan's father, was in the Navy during World War I. She really didn't know much about it. But just from researching the newspapers, he was on the Mercury, and it was a submarine that went between England and the United States, and they were looking for German U-boats. So that was kind of interesting. And Joan, I found all those articles and I sent them to him. So I had a lot of information and a lot of good pictures. I even found out, it's kind of interesting, a funeral didn't cost too much money. I found so many good primary documents you could teach to children. Like, I had a great-great aunt that died. Her funeral was $94.50 in 1905, you know? And then I found Camille, who used to work in the office there. She gave me copies of their death certificates. And they gave the wrong information on them. But isn't it great to have a primary document? So I found a lot of documents. Mistakes are made all the time on primary documents. You really can't always believe a census. People don't always tell the truth about ages. It was a social thing when they would come to the house. So I found it extremely interesting. Now, we didn't even know there was an Elizabeth Dean. She lived about a month. So again, when I was telling my cousin Mary, she said, gosh, we didn't even know about her, you know? So, gosh, you find so many good things when you're looking at primary documents. And again, I was teaching that to children. Now, a lot of the kids I taught were multicultural, many cultures. And when I was teaching this in the middle school, we were connecting it with the culture of their music. You know, where'd your family come from? What kind of music was going on way back then? And they were so good about looking at primary documents, trying to find out where they are. A lot of the children were Jewish children. A lot of their records were totally wiped out during the Second World War. So again, that was another thing we found out. And the connection that these children made with their parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, a lot of them had great-grandparents, was wonderful. So there was many things we did with this immigration unit. And of course they say to me, "Where'd you come from, Mr. Dean?" I said, "We really didn't do too much research on that, you know." And again, when I did the research, I found a great deal of information. I did a lot of stones in the cemetery. I went on findagrave.com. That's a wonderful site. And there are so many sites out there that you can, look at and research. Sometimes when you research on Ancestry, pictures come up and all kinds of information. I got a lot of records of registration in war, when they registered for the draft or registered when they were 18 years old. There's so many different things that we found out that answered a lot of questions when I would talk to my brothers and sisters. But saving documents is so important, because the story you heard was not always the real thing. And when you look at the primary document, you find out that, oh, really, is this how it was? So when I look at the gravestones down there in St. Joseph's, and I look at these people here, there wasn't 16 years between them, when they got married. There couldn't have been 16 years, because I've looked at so many different sources that contradict it. When I looked at the census, they seem to have 7 and 8 years between them, as opposed to 16 years. So you find that out. Now, a census is fabulous, absolutely fabulous. If you look at the New York State Census, it tells you what was going on. And during the Civil War, in 1865, they talk about, if I can find it, they talk about what was going on. Was there a lot of epidemics? What kind of diseases did people die from? They talked about the crops. And the economy in Dutchess County was not affected by the Civil War. In fact, it was better because of the Civil War. So all these things, that's great for children to learn as far as a document goes. So I found the kids very interested in researching their family histories. And we went on the New York State Census, we went on the census. Now, if I was trying to teach kids to memorize that we had a census from 1790, and every 72 years they get a new census out, it's kind of hard for kids to remember. But if they have to delve in and find this out for themselves, it's totally different. So, in 1912, we had the 1940 census published. The 1950 census will be published 72 years from 2012 because of the whole law of privacy. So we have this whole thing about privacy and no one, you're not allowed to see things. But these kids would go back and say, hey, there's my grandmother. She's on the 1940 census because she was born in 1938 or 1935. So the kids could see that, and they learned about a census. So I said, yeah, our Constitution says every 10 years there has to be a census. And it started in 1790 and it goes on. So the kids remembered that so much easier, and then, oh, when's the next census coming out? And I'd say, well, in 72 years, And it's so much easier to have children involved in a subject like this, to work, to do the research, and to really have a good time doing it, And so that's what I did, and that's what we're working on. And it was very successful. I thought it was very successful. I had tons of information, tons of pictures. I never thought I would do it like this. I never thought I would get so involved in it. But you do have a good time with it. The next I have a whole thing about the store. And the store, in 1869, the railroad office building, which was the old Bank of Millbrook, which is the Bank of Millbrook now, was owned by George Brown. And then from 1869 to 1870, it was a general store. Then it was the Millbrook Hotel. Then George Brown, in 1877, George Brown sold the building to John Schultz for $15,000. And then John Schultz in 1888 sold it to my family. Okay? And they paid $3,000 for it. And it became a grocery and dry goods store. Then my grandfather and his brothers sold it. They made $2,000. They sold it for $5,000 in 1891. And they bought the building on Front Street. Now the building on Front Street is the one I knew the best. That's where I stayed, Johnny Maroney's Market. And when I would go in there as a kid in the 50s and 60s, Johnny'd be in the back cutting meat, you know, and we came up on weekends and we stayed with my grandmother there. My grandfather was dead by then. So we stayed upstairs. She had a big porch and she had a dog named Brownie. I remember that. Every dog they had was named Brownie. My cousin Jody and I were laughing. And he used to sit on at one time he would sit on the side of the car, fall off every time they go around a corner. But they bought that building for $3,500. And they had an opening party. They pushed all the counters back and they had a big dance and gave out soda and they had this opening party. And then my Uncle Francis, who lived on Merritt Avenue, he sold the business to Johnny in 1956. And I used to always come up, and whenever I'd come up, I always go in and see Johnny and Buddy. And Ginny gave me this wonderful thing. It's a bill of sale. And I don't know where you found it, Ginny, but it was $5,000, John Dean and James Dean to the bank in Millbrook. And so I have a copy of the bill of sale, which is, that's a great document to show kids, you know? I mean, we had such a good time. And the girls were very interested in the clothing. When I was teaching that, the girls would say, look at that, when were they married, Mr. Dean? You know, when were they married? Is that what they did? And why did the man always sit down? And like when I took a course, down at the New York Public Library on the photographs, because I have a lot of photographs that aren't identified, they say that's very important to look at the clothing and the backgrounds. The backgrounds were just always the same thing. So you might see the same background wherever the picture was taken. They might have the same palm plant in a bowl or a chair or something. So it's kind of interesting that we're looking at the clothes. This was a great aunt of mine, and again, they were always looking, the girls were always looking at the clothes. And so again, it was good for the children. They were looking at the beards on the men or the mustaches. Why do they all wear, you know, dress like that? So that's the story. I have a great picture of the store. And that picture, my cousin Joan sent to me. And her father kept that picture. And this was Jim Dean, and this was my grandfather John Dean. My Uncle Francis, who took over the store. My father's down here. And Dr. Charlie Dean is right there. So again, it's kind of interesting to have this. Never thought I would ever do it, never thought I would have it. Great stories about the store. And then I have an article, I thought it was good. It was entered by burglars. Millbrook, Mirror and Roundtable, October 27th, 1933. Dean Brothers store entered by burglars. Dean Brothers store was broken into Wednesday night at 11:27. Now, how did they get it? They broke the cellar window and entered, turned off the light switch, which stopped the electric clock, which registered the time they entered. They left an empty pint bottle, which had contained some tree climbing liquid. At about the same time, two young men came down Franklin Avenue drunk, and the language used was obscene. Next time you go to Dean's, beware of the dog. As far as can be ascertained, nothing was stolen. So I love that article, and I found it in the Millbrook paper. I love the ads, you know. They were like, what would you say, selling these things that would cure you, you know, like a cough syrup, you know, or something. You know, crazy things, you know. Louise Thompson wrote a letter to my Uncle Francis. She was great. And there's a article there, and she was a great lady. I mean, she reported all the news, and she reported all the news. I wish I could find that letter. Very funny letter about what was going on there. And she said to him, "You wouldn't remember me. You won't remember me, but I'll try to find it."
How long did it take you to collect all this?
I think I started working on it about 10 years ago, maybe 12 years ago, when I was doing that kind of stuff, when I was teaching really and doing a lot. Let me just try to find that letter. Here it is. There's a letter, I gave the real one to Ginny, but she said, "Dear Francis Dean, your letter brought joy to my heart, and I thank you for letting me know how you liked the article about your father." She sent the article about Dean Brothers' store to her. He was one of the leading businessmen of his day. In fact, the whole Dean family did so much for Millbrook and were such fine people that I like to keep alive their memory as an incentive to the younger generation to go and do likewise. Wasn't she? She was great. Imagine writing something like that. "I think you do know me, although you couldn't recognize me now. I was a skinny freshman at Millbrook Memorial School in 1920-21. At that time, the Dean boys were the heartthrobs of the school. And there's a funny thing here. Every time the fire whistle blew, the Deans, Galliupos, and other big boys burst out of the school despite the teachers' loud protest and ran to put out the fire. One morning, the VIP, the very important professor, William R. Anderson, delivered the ultimatum. Any student leaving a class to run to a fire would be suspended. Trust them. The fire whistle blew. Presto, the boys all ran to the fire. I was standing in the hall when the boys returned at lunchtime. Professor Anderson walked in looking very stern. "Boys," he said, "you know what I said about running to fires." Stanislaus Dean, never at a loss for words, he was very funny, my Uncle Stanis. Miss Stanislaus, never at a loss for words, spoke up. "But Mr. Anderson, it was your house that was..." Nothing was ever said again about not running to fires, and no one was suspended. I am writing a history of the Millbrook Round Table, and I will be most grateful if you can answer a few questions for me. Do you remember the building where Mr. Swift had the first printing presses? It stood where Clifford Allen's car garages now stand. Mr. Tinsley William must be moved the presses to the present building, which he probably purchased from Dr. DeGaris about 1910, right? How has the Round Table helped Millbrook to grow and to organize? When was it most interesting? When John Tinsley was editor, or who? I am happy to hear that you are so completely comfortable in Florida. May you live many years to enjoy it. I will close hoping to hear from you soon. Sincerely, Louise Tompkins. So they wrote back and forth, and Uncle Francis would, she'd ask him questions and they would tell, and my father got the Round Table. We lived down in Yonkers at that time, and my father got the Round Table every week and, always read her articles because she was so interesting. And they got a lot, they got a lot of fun memories out of it. So, it's been 45 minutes and I don't want to bore you. Any questions? Any questions? Yeah.
What was the connection between my dentist, Dr. Dean?
That's my Uncle Charlie. That's my Uncle Charlie. Where is it? He's right there. Right there. Yeah. He lived right across the street there, in that house, right next to Grace Church.
I know where his office was.
And that was Tom Dean's house before him. He bought it from Tom Dean when Tom Dean moved. Yeah.
And now Joni Dean, what's the connection to you?
That's my first cousin,
Your first cousin.
my Uncle Francis's daughter.
She was a very good friend of my younger sister.
Yeah, she's great. She's in Florida now.
I know.
Yeah, she's a great lady.
Yep.
Yep, and she will be very happy when I call her. You gotta give me your name so I help.
Tell her Doris is brother says hello.
Doris's brother, okay. Okay, and that's it. Any other questions? Yep.
What was Vinnie Dean? Was he a brother to?
Vinnie Dean was, I'll show you right here. Jim Dean, that's Jim Dean. He had the store with my grandfather. And he had a son, Raymond. You would know George, you know Vinnie Dean, the lawyer in Poughkeepsie. He lived right over here on the corner. And his son was my brother's age. And then he had Ed Dean and Margaret Dean Clark. She lived in Pleasant Valley. So they were all cousins.
So Vinnie Dean was what to you?
Well, I don't know which
The
one.
lawyer.
Okay, he'd be my brother's age, and he would be a second
Oh,
cousin.
no, I know he lives in Florida now. His dad,
His dad would be a first cousin to my father.
first cousin to your
Yeah,
dad.
he
okay.
was right here, like with the Jim Dean family.
He's with the Jim Dean family.
Yeah. That's the story. Yes,
So,
Susan?
one house that your family lived in is the one that's on the corner of Franklin and Maple?
That's Vinnie Dean.
Vinnie Dean's house, yeah.
And then
Yeah.
where did Francis live on?
Right down Merritt Avenue. His house was next to the Knights of Columbus. Right next to the Knights of Columbus that
Which
was
was-
torn down.
Now, was
Yep.
that
It's a
the?
parking lot now.
Okay.
But right next to that parking lot was my Uncle Francis's house, and it looks totally different.
Up the
Doesn't
hill?
it, Ginny? Joni Dean, that's where Joni lived, yeah. Yeah,
That's really.
and that's the story, so.
Can we
Any
get
others?
you back?
I was a teacher of U.S. history at Arlington High School
Oh,
for a long
boy.
time. And we had, the syllabus at that time had a unit on immigration.
Yeah.
But I found there was one problem with it these days, that we try to encourage kids to look at their roots and so
Yeah.
on. But so many of them had broken families
Yeah.
or mixed families that it was sometimes
Yeah.
rather embarrassing to even attempt that.
Yeah.
Did you know you did that?
Absolutely, absolutely. I had children that were adopted, and I had an American family who adopted 2 Asian children. So you know what I had them do? I said, you have 2 wonderful parents who adopted you. Why don't you look up your mom and dad, where they're from? You know, and we ended up having a multicultural day out of this. And so the parents would bring in foods from their countries, and the kids would dress up in outfits. And then at night we had a dance. I got the music teacher involved, and we had dances from different countries, and they would speak different languages. So we really did a good thing, and we try to make it inclusive. But it is hard when there is a family that has, you know, a problem with divorce and all. But I invited them all. And I said, you know what, let's do the best we can. I didn't want anybody left out. You
That
know,
sounds wonderful.
I tried.
Did you ever find out what the priest found out in Ireland?
No, we never found out what the priest. But my cousin Joan said, Jack, it's the biggest joke, that when the 3 priests went to Ireland. Now, a dean, my father thought his grandfather was from Galway. And they weren't a very reputable bunch, the deans in Galway. They were responsible for cutting off the head or something of Charles I, and there was all kinds of problems. So, you know, I mean, he could have jumped ship, he could have been part of the IRA, he could have been anything, you know, so they didn't speak about it, but to our loss, you know, our loss. You know. So, well, thank you very much for such a